Today, we're diving into one of the biggest challenges MSPs face, the growing cybersecurity skills gap. Here's a reality check. 29% of ransomware attacks just last year started with compromised credentials, meaning attackers aren't just simply breaking in, they're logging in as if they belong. Combine that with a shortage of in-house cybersecurity expertise, misconfigured tools, and insecure networks, and it's clear why MSPs are seen as high-risk targets. Joining me to help us unpack these risks and share actionable strategies to protect your business and your clients is Andrew Mundell from Sophos. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Sydney, how are you?
Doing great. So glad to have you here with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, let's start by painting a clear picture of what's happening out there. Andrew, we know that MSPs are seen as one of the biggest cyber risks, not just for their clients, but even for themselves. In your view, what's making MSPs such big targets for cyber criminals these days?
Yeah, unfortunately, the attackers, they love MSPs. Now, I'm sure a lot of folks listening will have heard of this idea of a supply chain attack. That's where something that you as an end customer are maybe not completely in control of, that gets attacked. Well, MSPs are really good targets for those kind of supply chain attacks because attackers can break into just one organization, into that MSP, and they will typically have very high level privileges, often admin privileges, not only for the systems that are in use at that organization, whether it's their productivity tools, but often their security tools as well. So once you've opened one door, you've got a master key to go in and potentially start to cause havoc on so many other organizations as well. We've seen an increase in MSPs actually being targeted as well. In our last threat report from last year, we've seen more of a focus from attackers carrying out more complex and targeted attacks against MSP organizations as well.
The skills gap, this shortage of cybersecurity expertise, why is it such a huge challenge for MSPs?
That's right, Sydney. We're seeing this as a problem in most organizations. Over 70% of organizations reporting that they can't find the right security stuff. And we know that MSPs like to run lean. So the idea of hiring, recruiting, retaining, and training an entire team to run a 24/7 by 365 security operations team, that's a really expensive, that's a really time-consuming thing to do for MSPs. Plus, most MSPs run really lean, as I mentioned, and like to have that really good combination of business and technical skills. Well, dealing with cyber threats tends to be really heavily focused on the tech skills. Now, of course, it's really important that there's business context in there as well to understand what are the ramifications of taking certain actions. So it's really difficult for our MSP partners out there to fulfill this kind of level of expectations that some customers may have on them.
Stolen credentials is a major issue. How are these attackers getting their hands on this data, and why is it so effective?
I hate to sound like the broken record, Sydney, but it all comes back to phishing. It all comes back to trying to socially engineer our users to give us those credentials. And we've seen things like generative AI, these LLMs, the chat GPTs of the world. They've really helped. I think we've all seen those examples of poorly written phishing emails. Well, that problem's largely gone away with the help of some AI. In some cases, they'll even brute force it. And I think this is one piece that lots of organizations, and the smaller ones especially, will start to think, well, who's going to target me? But we see opportunistic attackers not specifically go out to target organizations, but instead they'll target vulnerabilities. So if a product that you're using, whether it's cloud-based or on your network, if it has a vulnerability associated to it, you can bet that attackers are going to try and leverage those vulnerabilities to attack those systems, break into them, and steal credentials. And then what do they do with them? Well, some attackers, that's all they want. We call them initial access brokers. All they want to do is steal credentials and then go out to those places on the dark web and start selling them. So other attackers will actually just go and buy sets of credentials. And as you said in the opener, that means they're just logging in now. There's very little breaking in for those middle attackers to do.
How does Sophos NDR for Microsoft Defender help MSPs better detect and respond to today's cyber threats?
Yeah, so Sophos MDR, in case anyone's not heard of it, is a managed detection and response service, essentially taking everything that we've talked about, everything that most organizations need to do in cybersecurity, and providing that as a service. We're really proud of the way that we work alongside Microsoft Defender. That's particularly useful for our MSP partners. We get it. Organizations have looked at the finances of using the Microsoft suites, those E3s, the E5s, and the appropriate ones for the other sectors. And especially from a partner perspective, if you've worked with that customer to help them understand that one of those subscriptions is the best thing for them, the last thing you want to have to do is come back and go, well, you need to rip it all out and not use that for your security. So we work hand in hand with Defender for organizations using every single level of Microsoft subscription. Now, what that means is we're bringing in data and all of this stuff, threat hunting and threat detection, it all comes down to data. What that means is that we can take data both from the telemetry that Defender is generating, but also from other interesting areas. We talked about stolen credentials. We can look at the audit logs in the Microsoft environment and use our own, we call it detection engineering, use our own logic to determine if we think a user account has been compromised. And we're doing that for our customers 24/7 by 365. Only getting in touch with that customer if there's a problem. And our customers can even delegate out some response actions to us. So if they want us to be able to go and isolate a machine or block a user account, they can tell us that we can go do that for them 3 a.m, the day of a holiday.
Now, let's shift gears and talk about MSPs versus their clients. There is a lot of overlap in the risks they face, but also some key differences. What would you say are the biggest risks MSPs and their clients have in common?
I'm going to choose one that everyone's heard of before. Again, Sydney, it's ransomware, right? Everybody is worried about ransomware. We're still seeing well over 60% of organizations classifying ransomware as their biggest risk to business. Now, what's even more troubling about that, and we've seen some other colleague organizations, our friends at Veeam, talk about how less than half of the data being recovered. So even organizations that decide they should go pay that ransom, it's been really difficult for them to actually restore and recover data. So that's without a doubt the biggest threat we're seeing everywhere. One thing that I think is particularly concerning for MSPs is this rising idea of insider threats. And there's a couple different ways to think of insider threats. The first is just by accident. The first is making configuration changes that maybe don't follow best practice and turning off particular capabilities, or as we talked about earlier, not having those eyes 24/7 by 365. That could all count as something that makes that MSP riskier for their business. We do see occasional insider threats where malicious actors are able to gain the confidence of employees. Most recently, and credit to KnowBe4 for being incredibly transparent about their hiring efforts and actually discovering that an employee was possibly someone based out of North Korea. So we're definitely seeing a slightly different approach, but yeah, it all comes back to ransomware.
We know both groups rank stolen credentials as their top concern. Why is that? Is it because the stakes are so much higher with MSPs managing multiple clients?
For me, that's it. I kind of used the analogy earlier of a master key. So once you've broken through that first door, if that MSP has administrative level access, and most do, that's why the clients called for an MSP, then it becomes a domino effect of being able to go through and start to run your attack against all of those clients. And in our research, we've typically seen credential theft as something that is identified quite early on in what turns out to be high impact multi-tenant attacks as well.
Misconfigured security tools. This seems like a hidden threat. Can you explain how this affects MSPs differently from their clients?
Yeah, really similar problem. When we're looking at MSPs, looking at those configurations, one misconfiguration at an MSP level can cause that effect down at all of their clients. So it's really important for MSPs to be especially mindful of any changes that they're making. 1/3 of security breaches are traced back to misconfigurations in the end. So we know it's a significant problem.
Attackers are increasingly using tools like LOL bins to avoid detection. Sophos found that these tools were used in 55% of analyzed attacks in the first half of 2024. Can you explain what LOL bins are and how MSPs can effectively detect and defend against these threats?
These are a really interesting area. It's been something that's been getting more popular in the last few years. So LOL bin, it stands for living off the land binaries. You might hear this pronounced LOL bins. Some folks will say lol bins. Other folks will just say lols. What all of that means is these are legitimate tools. Often they're tools that are embedded in the operating system. So if we think about the Microsoft ecosystem, we'll think about things like PowerShell, one of my old favorites, MSHTA, a Microsoft application for processing HTML. These are things that are built into the operating system, and attackers love them because from a defense perspective, it is really difficult to just block access to those tools. And if I'm an organization and I use the Microsoft suite, I can probably fairly safely go ahead and block things like the Google Drive sync application. So I've got a really simple way of denying a good path for data loss. It's much more difficult to do that for some of these tools like PowerShell. So what we think is really important is to leverage those EDR foundations. Leverage that to really understand what is going on in an environment and see if you can baseline some of that behavior, as well as make sure that you're only allowing the tools that you actually need to run to run.
Andrew, this is the part where we get proactive. We've talked about the problems, you've mentioned some solutions. Now let's really hone in on it. Upskilling is a big buzzword, but what does it look like for an MSP to close their cybersecurity skills gap?
I think the first thing is get hands on. There are some fantastic resources out there. Hack the Box is one that springs to mind. If you want to understand how is it that attackers are thinking, how is it that attackers are operating, that is a great way to take a look at it. On the less technical side, tabletop activities and exercises are really good ways of putting yourself into the shoes of someone in the midst of an attack and really getting a good understanding of what do you need to do when those things start to happen. Now, of course, Sophos and of course, all the other vendors out there, we have some training programs as well that we think are really good and useful, not only for helping our partners and customers understand that investigation element and some of the activities that they need to be doing, but helping give them an insight into those typical things that attackers will try and do. So it's another cliche for you, Sydney. I'm counting them. We're already up to 3 things. But I heard this once and really loved it, that cybersecurity is a lot like fitness. And fitness isn't something you have, it's something you do. You have to work at it all the time.
What about automation? Sophos studies indicate that automation tools reduce detection time by 40%. How much of this burden can we realistically shift to tools and technology?
Yeah, automation is definitely a big buzzword. We're starting to hear about agentic AI, about giving AI the ability to kind of choose its own adventure when it comes to automation. And it's really important. There's two ways to think about automation. The first is, what are we vendors doing? So inside of the Sophos stack, we have a number of automatic response actions that would typically be things a human would need to do. Those are high fidelity, those are high trust, and they're actually turned on by default. And what that means is we work continuously through all of our data to make sure that those are going to have the most effective success rate, and that we're going to keep the false positive rate for any of those actions to the absolute minimum. The next step is, how do we as practitioners, how do we start to leverage some of the automation tools? And a quick insight from how we've tackled this from our service is a principle that we call human in the loop. A very quick example of that is we are looking at leveraging AI and automation to help classify the millions of new websites that we see every week. And one of the things that we do there is have an automated AI-driven but human in the loop process where we'll extract good indicators of how that model is working and how the process is working and flag them over for human decisions. If a human would have made a different decision, we can use that to further refine the model. So keeping those humans in the loop for critical things we think is especially important. And it's bringing in that business context again. You probably don't want an automation that says, if this behavior happens, automatically go and isolate a system from network without some other logic that helps understand, but what if this is a business critical application? I don't want to necessarily take any downtime for that business.
Are there specific solutions or platforms that you recommend MSPs lean into to enhance their security capabilities?
Platform is definitely going to be the word of 2025. We're hearing it everywhere. I like to think of platforms as existing in two different ways. The first is the management platform. As an MSP, you've got so many different tools. Maybe you're one of the luckier MSPs, and I've worked with a few, who you're able to have a completely standard set of offerings across your entire customer base. So you know that your firewalls are managed from this location and your endpoint is managed here and your your email is managed over there. That's great, but bringing all of that stuff together into a single management platform with single sets of APIs, single sets of reporting and role-based access controls, that can massively increase the efficiency for MSPs. The second is this concept of a security operation, sometimes abbreviated to a SecOps, so a security operations platform. That's where you want your security operations analysts dealing with all of these signals, dealing with all of this data. And it's really important too that all of that data comes together in one place. And a good example of that is what I think the industry has been trying to do with SIM, with security information and event management. We've ended up with this idea of putting everything into one place, but now it becomes really noisy. So you'll often see these security operations platforms, they're not considered SIMs because they are really focused on the ability to detect threats and carry out response actions as well. And of course, the final piece of that is bringing all of those together into something that's multi-tenant, into something where MSPs have a view of all of their customers in one place.
Finally, let's talk about partnerships. For MSPs that don't have the resources in-house, how can they collaborate with external experts like Sophos to fill those gaps?
We love collaborating with our partners and especially our MSP partners. To anyone watching, you'll know that Sophos does not do any direct business. We absolutely take everything through the channel, and we're very proud of that. So the easiest thing to do is pick up the phone, talk to your Sophos person about how we would love to collaborate with you. And I'll give you a few ideas of some of the different ways that many organizations will work to collaborate. The first is on that management piece. It is, what can you do to bring together disparate products and manage them all in one place? The second is, how do you work as a service provider with potentially another service provider, an MDR organization like Sophos? And I think it's really important there, again, have those conversations to understand what are the rules of engagement? What are your expectations? Do you just want that MDR service to alert and maybe do some investigation? Spoiler alert, don't do that. Definitely have them do some more. Definitely have them actually take some of those response actions from you, because that way you know that it's in the exact right hands. We'll often hear about managed SOC or security operations center teams, and that's essentially what MDR services are providing. And then lastly, make sure that you understand what else might be something that that partner can help you with. Cloud infrastructure, AWS and Azure did a really good job of this. They had this concept of a shared security responsibility model. I would definitely recommend MSP partners to take a look at that concept from public cloud and start applying it to your security practices and seeing where you can partner up with key organizations to really help you ultimately deliver a better service to your customer and maintain efficiency and safety for your own operations.
Such valuable insights. Thank you, Andrew, so much for joining me.
Sydney, thanks so much for having me.
It's clear that addressing the cybersecurity skills gap is not just about managing threats, it's about protecting your clients, safeguarding your business, and maintaining your reputation. If you'd like to learn more about how Sophos can help MSPs strengthen their defenses and reduce risk, visit the website on your screen. For the Channel Company, I'm Sydney Neely.